The air in the Windsor suite was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the quiet hum of power. 12 CEOs sat around the polished mahogany table, their pens hovering over contracts worth nearly $2 billion. The amber glow from the chandeliers reflected off their crystal water glasses, casting a golden sheen over the room. This was my masterpiece. Every place card, every cultural nuance, every detail meticulously planned. But as I stood there, my heels sinking into the plush carpet, Damien Cross's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "You won't be needed anymore, Maris. Security will escort you out." His smirk was deliberate, his tone calculated. He wanted an audience. I felt the weight of every eye in the room. But it was Mr. Tanaka, the stoic CEO from Kyoto, who caught my gaze. His slight nod wasn't pity, it was acknowledgement. He knew what Damien didn't, that this deal, this moment, was built on 15 years of my blood sweat and missed birthdays. I'd spent nights hunched over flashcards, mastering Mandarin and German, until my tongue ached. I'd skipped my sister's wedding to salvage a deal in Zurich, and once talked a furious investor off a ledge in broken Cantonese. My job wasn't just about contracts. It was about reading the unspoken, the flicker of hesitation in a handshake, the subtle shift in tone that could cost millions. Damien, he bulldozed through nuance like a kid with a sledgehammer. I didn't move right away. My chair, the one I'd earned, now held his sleek leather portfolio, its edges too sharp, like the grin he'd worn since waltzing in 18 months ago. "Hungrier," he'd called me, in that hallway, whisper as if hunger was something you could measure in age. The room felt colder now, the air brittle. I let the silence stretch my fingers, brushing the edge of the table. Then, with a quiet laugh, one that made Damien's smirk falter, I reached into my blazer and slid a single flash drive across the table. "Funny," I said, my voice smooth as the whiskey they'd served at dinner. "The Mandarin translation of Clause 12 has a typo. Would have voided the whole deal by sunrise." The ripple of tension was instant. Mr. Tanaka's eyebrows shot up. Damien's face went pale. I didn't wait for security. I turned on my heel, the click of my heels echoing like a countdown. Behind me, the room erupted into hushed chaos. Outside, the New York skyline glittered indifferent. I took a deep breath, the winter air sharp in my lungs. 15 years ago, I'd been a wide-eyed coordinator with a passport full of dreams. Now I had something better than a seat at that table. I had the power to walk away, and for the first time in years, I felt light. Deals were my oxygen, not the glittering, headline-grabbing kind, but the ones forged in the quiet chaos of midnight negotiations and last-minute salvations. Like the time in Shanghai when I'd spent 23 hours straight in a smoke-filled conference room, my voice hoarse from switching between Mandarin and English until the deal was sealed with a handshake at 3:47 a.m., just 13 minutes before the deadline. Or the Zurich summit I'd prioritized over my own 20th wedding anniversary because the Swiss team had refused to sign, unless I was the one to review the final clauses. My marriage hadn't survived the relentless pace of airports and boardrooms. But the company thrived. That was the difference between me and Damien Cross. I built trust in whispers, in the way I remembered a CEO's favorite scotch, or caught the hesitation in a partner's voice before they even voiced it. Damien built PowerPoint slides and polished his LinkedIn profile. Where I saw nuance, he saw noise. Last year, Henrik Vollmer, the sharp-eyed CEO of a Berlin tech giant, had pulled me aside during a coffee break. "I wouldn't sign a single page of this if your name weren't on it," he'd muttered, his breath smelling of espresso and sincerity. It wasn't flattery. It was survival. The deal only closed because I'd caught a mistranslation in the penalty clause, a single misplaced character that would have cost us millions. Yet months later, it was Damien who stood on stage, accepting a glossy award for global excellence, his smile wide as the applause rolled over him. My name wasn't mentioned. It never was, but Damien's Windsor Suite ambush hadn't come out of nowhere. The knives had been out for months, hidden in corporate jargon and backhanded compliments. The first time he'd floated the idea of younger energy. It was over almond milk lattes in the executive lounge, his tone light testing. The second time, it was a comment about refreshing the brand's image during a budget meeting, his eyes skimming right past me. By the third, it was a full-blown campaign, subtle, surgical, and sanctioned by the board. I'd seen corporate coups before, but Damien's was different. He didn't just want me gone. He wanted me erased. And then came the final twist, one he hadn't anticipated. As I walked out of the Windsor Suite that day, my heels clicking like a metronome, counting down his arrogance, I pulled out my phone and sent a single email. Attached was a file every overlooked mistake, every near disaster I'd quietly fixed every time Damien's carelessness had almost sunk us. The recipients, the 12 CEOs who'd just watched him fire me. The subject line, due diligence. I didn't wait for a response. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in 15 years, I exhaled. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. The message from Clara burned in my palm like a live wire. He's brought her. She's in the hall, waiting. I didn't need to see the woman Damien had handpicked to replace me to know exactly who she'd be. Some bright-eyed MBA half my age, fluent in corporate buzzwords, but incapable of reading the tension in a room. My fingers tightened around my tablet, the screen flashing with the forwarded email Damien had carelessly copied me on weeks ago. Photo capture leadership refresh Windsor event. The details were meticulous angles, lighting even the exact moment the photographer should snap the shot of his strategic hire, taking my seat. This wasn't just a power play. It was a production. I forced my breathing to slow, counting the beats between inhales. The anger was there, white-hot and razor-sharp, but I let it settle into something colder, quieter. Years of navigating boardroom wars had taught me this. The most dangerous moves looked like surrender. So I smoothed my blazer, straightened the name cards one last time, and smiled at the junior associate hovering nearby. "Tell Mr. Cross we're ready to begin." I said, my voice steady. The trap had been set months ago, buried in the diplomatic clause I'd woven into the contract, like a thread of invisible wire. If the principal liaison named in this agreement is replaced or removed before final signing, all memorandums of understanding are automatically void. It was elegant in its simplicity, a safeguard I'd sold as standard protocol to every CEO in that room. Henrik Vollmer had called it prudent. Mr. Tanaka had nodded approvingly. None of them knew it was my insurance policy, least of all Damien. The doors swung open, and there she was. Lillian Carter, Damien's golden girl, her navy blazer crisp, her smile rehearsed. The cameras in the hallway whirred to life, capturing her grand entrance. Damien's voice boomed across the room, dripping with false warmth. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce the new face of our global strategy team." I didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched as Lillian stepped toward my chair, her fingers brushing the backrest. Then, with perfect timing, Mr. Tanaka cleared his throat. "This is most irregular," he said, his tone icy. "Where is Maris?" The room stilled. Damien's smile faltered. "Maris is no longer with the team," he said, too quickly. Henrik Vollmer leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Then neither am I. He closed his folder with a snap. Per clause 14.7, this agreement is nullified upon removal of the designated liaison. Maris was named in every draft. The silence that followed was deafening. Damien's face drained of color as the realization hit him. The CEOs weren't just witnesses to his spectacle. They were accomplices in mine. I stood then, gathering my things with deliberate slowness. "Good luck with the photos," I said, nodding to the bewildered photographer. "Though I'm afraid they'll need a new caption." The last thing I saw as I walked out was Damien's mouth opening and closing, like a fish stranded on dry land, and Lillian Carter already edging toward the exit, her loyalty evaporating faster than Damien's credibility. The doors closed behind me. Somewhere in the distance, a phone began to ring. The board, no doubt. I didn't look back. The weight of the security token in my bag felt heavier than ever as Damien strutted around the Windsor suite, basking in what he thought was his triumph. His voice carried through the room as he announced, "We'll have the final contracts signed by end of day," completely unaware that the documents on the table were nothing more than beautifully bound placeholders. The real agreements, the ones that would actually move $1.9 billion, were locked behind my digital signature, and that key wasn't going anywhere. I watched as Lillian Carter, Damien's chosen successor, reached for a pen, her fingers hovering over the signature line. She glanced at me, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. That's when Henrik Vollmer spoke up, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Before we proceed, I'd like confirmation that Maris has authenticated these documents." Damien froze. "That won't be necessary. The signatures are already in place." Mr. Tanaka set down his pen. "Then why does the final clause state that execution requires her encrypted verification?" The room went still. Damien's jaw tightened. As the realization dawned on him, he hadn't just lost the deal by firing me. He'd lost control of the narrative entirely. The CEOs weren't just walking away. They were holding him accountable. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the security token, letting it catch the light for just a second before slipping it back into place. A silent reminder that some power couldn't be taken, only entrusted. Then, with deliberate calm, I turned to Lillian. "Good luck," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You'll need it." The room erupted into hushed conversations. Some CEOs already gathering their things, others shooting. Damien looks of cold disapproval. I walked out the weight of 15 years, lifting from my shoulders with each step. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in years, I smiled. Damien had wanted a spectacle. He just hadn't expected to be the one left standing in the ruins. The air in the Windsor suite turned glacial as Damien fumbled with the contract, his fingers betraying the slightest tremor. He cleared his throat, attempting to bluff his way through Clause 17, the same clause I'd spent 37 hours straight, negotiating across 3 time zones. This section clearly outlines the mutual obligations. He began, but the CEO from Singapore cut him off with a raised hand. "Maris drafted this clause after the Jakarta incident last year," she said coolly, her manicured nail tapping the page. "Without her here to explain the contingency triggers, this document is unenforceable in my country." A ripple of agreement moved through the room. The interpreter for the Shanghai delegation, a woman I'd worked with for a decade, quietly removed her earpiece and stood. Then, with deliberate grace, she placed her translation equipment on the table and walked out. The message was unmistakable. Loyalty couldn't be bought, only earned. Damien's neck flushed crimson as the Munich CEO slid his copy of the contract toward the center of the table. We'll reconvene when proper oversight is restored. His briefcase clicked shut like a judge's gavel. I remained motionless by the door, my security token a silent sentinel in my pocket. The photographers Damien had hired were still snapping away, but now their shots captured something far more damning than he'd intended. 12 of the world's most powerful executives abandoning the table one by one. Lillian Carter, Damien's would-be successor, suddenly found something urgent on her phone. I should check on the revised drafts, she muttered, edging toward the exit. Damien stood alone at the head of the table, his reflection fractured in the polished mahogany. The Windsor suite, once a stage for his triumph, had become a courtroom, and every departing back was a verdict. As I turned to leave, the last thing I heard was the Oslo CEO's dry remark to his aide: "Tell legal to prepare the breach notices, and find out where Maris is having lunch." The elevator doors closed. Outside, Manhattan glittered indifferent to the quiet revolution that had just taken place. I breathed in the crisp winter air. Some battles weren't won with shouting, but with silence and the weight of what you carried when you walked away. The scrape of the Oslo CEO's chair against marble echoed like a death knell. His words, "Our memorandum is now void," hung in the air, pristine and unassailable. Damien's fingers twitched toward the contract, as if he could physically glue the disintegrating deal back together. "We can still," but the room was already in motion. The São Paulo CEO didn't bother with words. He simply snapped his briefcase shut, and strode out his aide, murmuring into a headset. "Cancel the press release." The Singapore delegate paused, only to slide her unsigned copy across the table pages, facing away from Damien, the ultimate corporate dismissal. Henrik Vollmer's handshake was the final nail. "You were always the deal," he said to me, loud enough for everyone to hear. Damien flinched as if struck. Then came the detail that would haunt him. The Toronto CEO didn't just leave. She abandoned her Montblanc pen on the table, a $900 farewell gift to no one. In our world, that wasn't forgetfulness. It was a verdict. I adjusted the strap of my bag, the security token inside it, now heavier with possibility than obligation. The photographers Damien had hired were still there, but their lenses now captured his hollow stare, the empty chairs, the untouched champagne. As I turned to leave, the last thing I saw was Damien reaching for that discarded pen, hesitating, then pulling his hand back as if it burned. The elevator doors closed. Somewhere below, a car waited. Somewhere beyond that, 12 CEOs were dialing their boards, and in my pocket a single text flashed. "Lunch at Le Bernardin. We have terms to discuss. Oslo." Power, I reflected as the city skyline blurred past, wasn't about the chair you occupied. It was about the chairs that emptied when you walked away. The marble hallway absorbed the chaos behind me like a sponge. Damien's voice, sharp with desperation, carried through the cracked conference room door. "Get legal on the line now." I paused near a potted fern, pretending to scroll through my phone as the speakerphone crackled to life. "Without the named liaison's encrypted signature, the system won't authenticate." Our chief counsel's voice was clinical. "Attempting to bypass it triggers automatic alerts to all signatories." A laptop snapped open. Then came the sound I'd been waiting for, Damien's guttural groan, as he saw the notification flashing on screen: "Final signature missing. Contract invalid." 2 junior staffers rushed past me. their whispers slicing through the tension. Oslo just emailed the board, called us unstable partners. I pressed the elevator button with deliberate calm. Behind me, Damien's voice spiraled into damage control. Draft a statement focus on market confidence. No one says, void. The doors opened. As I stepped inside, the PR director emerged from the suite, her face ashen. Our eyes met for half a second, just long enough for me to see the dawning realization in hers. The elevator doors closed on Damien's last fractured command. Just find a way to silence. My phone buzzed. A new email from Henrik Vollmer's assistant. Mr. Vollmer requests your presence at the Peninsula at 2 p.m. He's bringing the Berlin team. I exhaled, watching the floor numbers descend. Some collapses weren't loud. They happened in the space between a raised voice and a closed door. And in that space, power didn't shout. It simply changed hands. The crisp New York air tasted like possibility as I crossed the plaza, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the granite. When my phone buzzed with Takahashi's call, I didn't hesitate. Mari-san. His voice carried the warmth of shared history, not the sterile politeness of boardrooms. His offer was direct full autonomy, a negotiator's blank check, and something Damien had never given me respect, carved into the contract itself. Before I could respond, Henrik Vollmer's text flashed across the screen. Name your terms. We only move forward with you. Then came the third message. The institutional investor who'd been ghosting Damien's team for months. Funds released upon your confirmation as lead. I paused near a bronze sculpture, its polished surface reflecting the midday sun. This wasn't just redemption. It was revelation. The market had spoken in the only language that mattered: cold, hard preference. A cab slowed beside me, but I waved it off. The cafe around the corner was waiting, the same one where I drafted my first deal 15 years ago, back when my ambition fit in a single briefcase. Now I carried something far heavier. As I pushed open the cafe door, the barista, who'd seen me through every career milestone, nodded toward my usual corner table. There, steaming beside a fresh notebook, sat a double espresso. No order needed. Some foundations once built never crumble. I took the first sip, bitter and perfect, as my phone lit up again. Oslo, Singapore, São Paulo. The avalanche had begun. Outside the window, a news ticker flashed on a passing taxi. Cross-global shares plummet 18% amid deal collapse. The irony was almost poetic. Damien had wanted me erased from the narrative. Instead, he'd made me indispensable. I opened the notebook to a blank page. The pen hovered for just a second before I began writing, not terms, not conditions, but a single word at the top of the page. Chapter 1. The afternoon sun slanted across the conference table as I uncapped the Montblanc pen. Its weight, familiar now, like an old friend returned. The contract before me bore my name in bold black letters, Chief Negotiation Advisor. No asterisks, no conditions. Just my legacy, finally, in my own handwriting. Around the table, 12 CEOs watched in silence as I signed. Not the tense quiet of the Windsor suite, but something richer, the hush of hard-won trust. Henrik caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The same one Mr. Tanaka had given me months ago when Damien made his fatal miscalculation. The pen glided across the paper, its nib leaving an unbroken line. No hesitations, no corrections, just certainty. When I finished, I didn't slide the document toward some faceless executive for approval. I held it up, letting the light catch the fresh ink. To new bridges, I said. Glasses clinked. Across the room, the Tokyo team raised theirs in unison. No translators needed this time. Later, alone in my office, I placed the Montblanc in the center drawer, not tucked away, but displayed beside a single photograph, me at 26 standing on a Zurich tarmac with a battered suitcase and a passport full of stamps. The girl in that picture had known something the world hadn't yet realized. I closed the drawer gently. Outside, Manhattan glittered its skyline, stitched together by deals I'd brokered, relationships I'd built, and now finally, by a future I controlled. The phone rang. A new client. A new deal. This time, when I answered, it wasn't as someone's employee. It was as the architect. The late afternoon light caught the edges of the signed contracts scattered across the table, each one a testament to the unshakable truth I'd carried through every boardroom and midnight negotiation. Real power isn't seized, it's earned. I ran my fingers along the embossed letterhead of my new firm, Halloway Global Strategies, feeling the texture beneath my fingertips. Not a comeback, not revenge, a renaissance. Outside the city pulsed with possibility. Somewhere downtown, Damien was probably still scrambling to explain the collapse to his board. But here, in this sunlit room, filled with the quiet hum of respect, the past felt exactly where it belonged behind me. My assistant leaned in, holding out a fresh cup of coffee. "The Berlin team arrives in 20, she said. Should I set out the Japanese tea service or the Italian espresso set? I smiled, glancing at the Montblanc pen now displayed in its glass case on my shelf. Both, because this time, the world wouldn't just meet me on my terms, it would savor them. The circle wasn't just larger, it was limitless.